It's the fear. It's the long finger of big night. The darkness that feeds the muttering damned to the gentle white maw of the wards. Olga knew it first. Saint Olga. She tried to hide it from it, clawing at her radio gear, bloodying her hands to destroy her ship's broadcast capacity, praying Earth would lose her. Let her die. William Gibson, Hinterlands. How will we react when we finally find life on another world? When the decades of effort and layered exploration undertaken since we first left Earth at last reach their conclusion? Would it depend, perhaps, on what form the life took? A mat of cyanobacteria under the rocks of Mars? Hardy skyplankton weathering the fires of Venus? Even an ecosystem of shadowy leviathans in the oceans of Europa? I am something of a cynic when it comes to evaluating human reactions. Very likely, in my opinion, after a period of euphoria and the publication of a stream of ecstatic and quickly dated sci-fi novels, humanity will turn away and get on with its collective life. As a race, we have an uncanny ability to trivialize the extraordinary. But for a very small number of our incautious species, if such a find occurs, there will be no jubilation. No parties, no wild digital gesticulations on social media, no hope. For them, the discovery would mark the first strike of the chisel in the epitaph of humanity. It will confirm what they had long suspected, but hoped they would never find. Somewhere in the dark fog of humanity's future, an ultimate fate awaits us. A final reckoning we cannot and will never escape. A great force that has consumed every sentient mind before it, and against which we are as powerless as a gnat in a hurricane. They have given this agent of our inescapable doom a somewhat mundane name: the Great Filter. Where are we? Almost every question ever asked in astronomy boils down to these three words. In the 3,000 years we have sought them, the answers have not been kind. As technology has broadened our sight, the ebon darkness of night has grown to swallow all of creation, leaving our world a helpless, solitary, guttering candle. Some, like Carl Sagan, sought to bridge the emptiness by seeking other minds in the dark. And over the last 60 years, those who followed him invested millions of hours of time and effort into the quest. And the result, to date, has been nothing. The universe, it seems, is replete with wonder, but without the lure of life beyond Earth, devoid of true destinations. In a very real sense, after 3,000 years, our answer to where we are is nowhere. And for people like Robin Hanson, an unconventional economist currently at George Mason University in Virginia, that is the best place we could ever be. In 1998, Hanson published a short paper entitled The Great Filter, Are We Almost Past It?, in which he argued that, quote, contrary to common expectations, evidence of extraterrestrials is likely bad, though valuable, news. The easier it was for life to evolve to our stage, the bleaker our future chances probably are. Unquote. This is not due to any direct threat on the part of the aliens themselves. I covered that in the 25th video in this series. Indeed, such extraterrestrials need not be more developed than, say, a mouse. It is their mere existence, Hanson argues, that spells our doom. The reasoning behind what Hanson calls the Great Filter is shockingly simple. Hansen begins by essentially following the logic of Michael H. Hart, which I covered in another previous video. Put simply, there are 400 billion stars in our galaxy, and our galaxy is 12 billion years old. It took 4.5 billion years for advanced tool-using intelligences to evolve on our planet, and every star in our galaxy is expected to have at least one planet. Therefore, every one of those worlds has had an average of about 3 chances to evolve sapient, technologically advanced life, which makes the chances of us being alone in our galaxy about 1 in a trillion. As far as we can tell, there are no limits to interstellar colonization, save for the collective will to do it. Even with the technology we possess today, it would be perfectly possible to reach the nearest star within 100,000 years. A plane ride compared to the age of the galaxy. And assuming life follows the same logarithmic pattern amid the stars that it follows everywhere on Earth, with a colonization rate of 2 stars per expansion, within just 30 waves, or 3 million years, every star system in the galaxy, including our own, should have been colonized 5 times over. A rate of 10 stars per expansion would reach pan-colonization in 12 waves. Evidence for intelligent life should be visible around every star we see. Dyson spheres, Niven rings, asteroids covered in solar collectors. Even just dumping radioactive elements into a star would produce changes we could see with our current technology. Instead, we see nothing. All this is well known, and is often mistakenly called the Fermi paradox. Mistakenly, in that it isn't a paradox and wasn't proposed by Fermi. Solutions for the Fermi paradox usually fall into one of 4 categories. 1. They're not there. 2. They're there, but they're not colonizing. 3. They're there, and they're colonizing, but we can't see them. And finally, 4. They're there, they're colonizing, but they're making us not see them. Hansen discounts option 3 as Hart did. Options 2 and 4 fail what is called exclusivity. Just because, quote, they aren't doing something doesn't mean that every member of their species, or every species out there, will agree with them. If one society decided to stay at home and indulge in virtual reality over reality itself, then they would soon be overtaken 1,000,000 to 1 by the small minority that refused that path. By that logic, it is arguable that option 2 is impossible. As for option 4, to enforce such a no-contact rule, the so-called zoo hypothesis, would require massive resources and effort. Incidentally, and I only just realized this as I was researching, if the zoo hypothesis is correct, then faster-than-light travel must be possible, because only an FTL-capable society would be able to maintain the cultural homogeneity required to enforce it. And even if it were possible to enforce, as Hansen notes, we should still see evidence of their presence outside of our exclusion zone. Which leaves us with option 1. Could it be true that we are alone in our galaxy, let alone the universe of billions of galaxies visible to us? Hansen notes that to date, as we never tire of informing creationists, every aspect of our universe yet discovered has been best predicted and modeled by employing universal physical laws, rather than the arbitrary will of a creator. What is true for gods must also be true for aliens. But if it is true, what does it mean? How have we, of all known life, managed to balance on the peak of a 1,000,000,000 to 1 probability spike? It would be folly to argue that such an improbable event was due to chance. That is the essence of the Great Filter. The Great Filter, as laid out by Hansen, suggests that in the long chain of events from inanimate matter to galactic pan-colonization, one or more of the many steps involved must be ridiculously improbable. So improbable, in fact, that no culture or species has surpassed it in the age of the universe. In his paper, Hansen lays out 9 basic steps that must be completed if what he calls the explosion were to occur. 1. The right star system, including organics. 2. Reproductive something, e.g. RNA. 3. Simple, prokaryotic single-cell life. 4. Complex, archaetic, or eukaryotic single-cell life. 5. Sexual reproduction. 6. Multicell life. 7. Tool-using animals with big brains. 8. Where we are now. And 9. Colonization explosion. From this, it is tempting to simply map out each of the steps onto the history of our planet, see which ones took the most and which the least time, and assign a probability based on that. But, Hansen argues, this is false logic. If the chances of something happening within the age of the Earth is exceptionally low, say greater than 1 in a trillion, then probability suggests that in that exceptionally rare situation in which it does occur, it should take roughly the same amount of time as a lower but still rare chance, say 1 in a billion or 1 in a million. Hansen divides the evolution of life into 5 roughly equal epochs, each lasting around 1 billion years. The first billion years after the Earth's formation produced the simplest prokaryotic life. Eukaryotes appeared 2 billion years after that, while 0.8 billion years later saw the advent of sexual reproduction. 500 million years later saw the first multicellular life, which then led to our current biodiversity 0.6 billion years later. These numbers are a bit kludgy, don't try adding them up, and have been refined somewhat since Hansen published his paper nearly 25 years ago, but the general scheme still holds up, with the added caveat that we still don't precisely know when and how life initially arose. After adding a number of other considerations like language development, Hansen concludes that the creation of our problematic race took, on average, about 8 or 9 hard steps to accomplish. If true, this would, by itself, answer the Fermi paradox pretty handily. If the probability of each of those hard steps was, say, 1%, then the combined likelihood of our emergence is a frankly staggering 1 in 10 to the 16, or 10 quadrillion. That would mean we shouldn't expect another species like our own to exist within the nearest 10 to 20,000 galaxies. A lonely prospect for humanity, no doubt. But it would, as Hansen points out, herald our golden age, as the universe, at least as far as we are ever likely to traverse it, will be open to us to exploit and colonize as we please. But, as always, there's a problem. Most scientists don't consider many of those steps improbable at all. Certainly the right planet with organics is a far from insurmountable step. Planets within stars' habitable zones have already been found in their dozens, while the ingredients for life are actually more common in space than they are on Earth. Tool use and big brains also does not appear to be an uncommon trait, at least currently. Dozens of animals, from close relatives such as chimps and orangutans, to such unlikely candidates as crows and octopuses, have been shown to use tools, and there's no reason to assume, given the incompleteness of the fossil record, that simple tool use did not emerge in prehistory. The jump from simple tool use common across the living spectrum to the sophisticated, advanced tool use that is, as far as we know, unique to our genus, may have taken as little as 1 million years. Even acknowledging the improbability factor, that is not a lot of time for genetic change. Our knowledge of the history of life is still incomplete. We know that all current cellular life began with a single common ancestor, as did all sexually reproducing life and all eukaryotic life, indicating they only emerged once. Other necessary biotic functions, such as oxygenic photosynthesis and nitrogen fixation, also appear to have only evolved once. That does not preclude, however, that they emerged many times before, yet left no presence in modern organisms. Multicellular life, on the other hand, has occurred at least 25 times on Earth alone, and so is unlikely to be a substantial barrier to the rise of intelligence. Also, I should note that while oxygenic photosynthesis has only evolved once, photosynthesis itself has evolved multiple times, meaning it is unlikely to be a great filter either. So, where is this proverbial great filter? The simple answer is, we don't know. Our world's natural history provides us with a sample of one, and drawing meaningful conclusions from a sample of one is notoriously difficult. The easiest solution would be to find more samples, a quest that has driven the majority of space science for the last 50 years. In recent times, At least in the rarefied world of space fandom, there is a growing sense that, one way or another, that quest may be coming to an end. The next generation of telescopes would allow us to observe life-enabling compounds in the atmospheres of distant exoplanets, while coming missions to Mars, Venus, Jupiter's moon Europa, and Saturn's moon Titan are all specifically oriented toward determining the possibility, and perhaps one day, the presence of extraterrestrial life. Virtually everyone agrees that the discovery of life off Earth would be of immense scientific importance. For most, it will be a glorious affirmation of the ubiquity, power, and resilience of life, particularly if it were found to have emerged completely independently of life on Earth. It would provide science with a second evolution with which to contrast our own, allowing us a new objectivity in our understanding of life. Others, however, would view its importance very differently. For them, every such discovery would be a keening note in the death knell of the human race. Nick Bostrom, a specialist in existential risk and founder of the Oxford University's Future of Humanity Institute, which also includes Robin Hanson on its staff, has said he hopes that Mars is devoid of life. Quote, "Dead rocks and lifeless sands would lift my spirit," he wrote in 2008, and also that for him, the discovery of extraterrestrial life, in whatever form, would be, quote, "the worst news ever printed in a newspaper," unquote. Why? Well, if we found that life on Mars had advanced to the level of, say, a Volvox colony, that would knock several events out of contention for the title of Great Filter. Volvox colonies are spheres of green algae composed of just 50,000 cells, or about as many as died and were replaced in my own body in the time it took me to say that. Yet they are multicellular, photosynthetic, prokaryotic, and reproduce sexually. Even if life on Mars were found to share the same abiogenesis as life on Earth, the fact that it was able to independently complete so many seemingly improbable steps in its evolution within our own solar system would tell us unequivocally that our path is not special. Another intelligence could and should have completed it as well. And it only takes one to achieve galactic pan-colonization. For these pessimists, the killer strike would likely be the discovery of life in the lakes of Saturn's moon Titan. If, over the next century, biological sample returns from the depths of the European Ocean or the atmosphere of Venus were shown to have evolved from the same ancestor as humanity, so-called panspermia, then that, at least, would leave abiogenesis, the formation of life from non-life, as a plausible great filter. But if life were found slumbering in the tarry depths of Kraken Mare, that wouldn't just change the game. It would smash the board. The lakes of Titan are composed of liquid methane and have an average surface temperature of 90 kelvins. To exist in such a frigid realm, life would have to be built different from the molecules up. There is no way such life could share a common ancestry to our own. It would have to have emerged from a separate abiogenesis. If abiogenesis is probable enough to have occurred twice in our own solar system, then it cannot be a great filter. So let's say the worst-case scenario is true. Our solar system is replete with life, from the hypercyclic lakes of Titan to the barren wastes of Mars to the boiling acid skies of Venus. Humanity cheers as it no longer faces the infinite darkness alone. Perhaps there are even hints of other minds like ours, peering from the flowing deeps of outer moons. All the past great filters have been closed. Yet the universe remains as dead as ever. No signs come to us from the night of other races that have crossed our threshold, even though logic dictates they should exist in their billions. We shout into the great, dark, empty hall of the universe, but hear nothing back. Not even our echoing voice. There is no way that this could be a fluke. The numbers are simply too vast for that to make sense. If we are alone, it is because something has made us alone. But what? Common sense draws us to mundane earthly answers. And indeed, Hansen himself argues that, quote, "We should search out and take especially seriously any plausible scenarios, such as nuclear war or ecological collapse, which might lead to our future inability to explode across the universe." Unquote. Indeed, within wider culture, as the title of books and plays, the Great Filter appears to have become synonymous with the gestating threats of today, particularly climate change. But, as Nick Bostrom points out, such petty societal hazards would, if realized, set our global civilization back at most a few thousand years. A train delay in the story of our galaxy. For the Great Filter to be the Great Filter, it must be inescapable, a nemesis awaiting humanity at the ultimate end. It's difficult to envision what such a threat could be. Given that technologies already in development could allow for interstellar travel in decades rather than millennia, to prevent pan-colonization, the Great Filter would have to strike within the next 100 to 1,000 years. A sufficiently close gamma-ray burst could take us out, but that only occurs once in a billion years. An asteroid the size of the Chicxulub impactor that took out the dinosaurs is only 10 times more likely. A supervolcanic eruption is far more likely, and if our genes and geology are anything to go by, may have reduced the human population to a few hundred scattered individuals as recently as 75,000 years ago, but it is unlikely to damage our modern world more thoroughly than, say, a nuclear war. The Future of Humanity Institute these days spends most of its time warning of the dangers of AI. But an AI takeover, while certainly bad news for humanity, says nothing about the Fermi paradox. It merely replaces an organic intelligence with a synthetic one. Indeed, one far better suited to interstellar travel than we are. One arguably plausible answer, which could be extended beyond our parochial situation, is what Bostrom calls the vulnerable world hypothesis. As technology advances, it reaches a point at which the ability to destroy or substantially deplete the world's population opens to a larger and larger segment of it. In the past, an unhappy, nihilistic oddball might have dreamed of going out and taking the world with him. With the aid of cheap gene editing or nanotechnology, he may yet achieve that goal. Humanity might be able to stop one such person, but 100? 1,000? 1,000,000? The idea that some gormless incel could one day be the human race's ultimate adjudicator might seem anticlimactic, but if you think about it, it's a fair reflection of the current geopolitics. If you wanted to put a nobler spin on this idea, you could say that we have been a global culture for, at most, a century, and that the chances of us surviving in this state grow slimmer and slimmer as the years go by. Sooner or later, random chance, if nothing else, says we will, collectively, die. Scientists like to put a veneer of hope onto the Great Filter, saying we could pass it once we become a multi-planet species, thus mitigating threats only applicable to a single planet. But again, this misinterprets what the Great Filter is. It is not Frank Herbert's Kralazek, the typhoon struggle that will test humanity to its limits and see us emerge stronger. It is an inescapable doom. The last strike by an uncaring universe against a feeble organic film called life. Our only true hope is that it is not out there.